Come on in. So this is going to be a bit of an open forum today. We're going to be answering questions regarding the changes that are coming through. We have Agrippa on stage. He's going to be the co-host. Agrippa, come on up.
Hello.
So who's Agrippa?
Yeah, so hey folks, I'm Agrippa. I'm originally from Canada, like a lot of Bittensor folks. In my past life, I was a video game producer at EA Sports, working on making the FIFA games, and I got the opportunity to join Opentensor this year, and it's been a blast so far. I'm looking forward to being on Novelty Search today, and my role is going to be as a facilitator for the AMA, so picking out some of the most impactful questions from the community and lobbing them at Const.
Perfect.
Yes, we already received a bunch of questions, which I have noted down, but please do continue posting any questions you have in the chat there, and we'll try to get to as many as we can.
But I actually meant not you. Like, who's Agrippa?
Oh, so he was a Roman general, and he was the best friend of Augustus Caesar and won a lot of important battles for him.
All right, let's go. Yeah. So yeah, lob me some questions. Softballs first.
So before we launch into the AMA, there were a couple of big impactful features coming up that we wanted to talk about. The first one of these being sub-subnets. So if I remember correctly, the idea for sub-subnets was originally raised in a novelty search with Score a while back, and the whole community got quite excited about how this could look. And then after some initial investigation, we had a few subnet owners say that this feature might not be useful because we have multiple subnets who already have built similar incentive splitting mechanisms on their end. So can you talk a little bit about why this was brought back into the roadmap?
When we first implemented the set weights feature, there was actually a bit of a philosophical debate that happened in the community about whether or not we should normalize the weights on the chain, or if we should normalize the weights on the validator side. And I actually put my neck out and said we should normalize them on the validator side because the chain should just accept like well-formed transactions. And anyways, we decided to go with normalization of the chain because it was just sort of like an ease of use feature. Right? You don't need to worry about the normalization getting it perfectly. The values sum to one. We're actually just going to normalize it on the chain, and that actually makes it a lot easier for people to run Bittensor subnets without having to like do that sort of accounting on the Python side. It's an ease of use thing, and it's the same answer for subnets. Like originally, we thought, okay, well, it's actually possible to run your version of subnets on a Bittensor subnet right now. You don't need to actually have a separate weight matrix for producing a similar effect. The only difference is that there's it's sort of difficult to see how the weights and the emission are distributed because that that view, that interface is not explicit on the chain. So it is actually possible right now to run multiple incentive mechanisms and sort of craft a weights matrix that has that implicitly integrated. But the truth is that there's sort of like power users in Bittensor, and there's people that are just learning the ropes. And actually facilitating like ease of use in terms of being able to set like different weights is a feature that people really want when they're not just power users. So the original pushback was like, hey, we can do it anyways. And that's true. Like mathematically, you can actually achieve subnets, but there is some loss there. Like if you want to extract the weights back out, you say like, okay, how much did this mechanism, how are the weights for this mechanism set versus how are the weights for that mechanism set? It's not obvious from the actual data on the chain. So this will allow people to actually, call for, the weights for mechanism 1 and 2 and 3 and see how they're performing. So it's a transparency issue. I think that this will open up a lot of creativity for people that want to incentivize different types of things and even like merge mechanisms from other subnets into their own. It's actually just kind of like an OSS fork operation and then setting the mechanism weights in a different way. So you could like very easily take, subnet 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, and put them on your subnet, just run that validator on your side, and all of a sudden you actually have exactly the same incentivization mechanism. You don't need to mess around with merging the weights together with a complicated mathematical process. So yeah, I think that the debate was settled. Like we're gonna allow this. That means that there's actually a multi-dimensional weight matrix associated with each subnet. It means that there's a multidimensional bonds matrix. It means that there's individual emission terms, incentive terms, trust terms, consensus terms. However, there's not unique UIDs. So there's still only going to be 256 UIDs in the subnet. It's except that they can be like abstractly distributed. So you'd be like, okay, hey, well, like we're going to incentivize, these sets of UIDs in this way, and these sets of UIDs in another way. So we really think that this is going to open up a lot of creativity in how big subnets can be and what they can focus on. It was initially thought about and promoted on the Score call, because Score was like, hey, we actually want to think about building different types of incentive mechanisms on our subnet. That's not just for, like, say, soccer. Let's not just incentivize the speed, but let's also incentivize um, like the ability to detect these types of objects and like this type of model. So like that kind of splitting turns the subnets a little bit like into a mixtures of experts model, right? In machine learning, you can have dense models that do everything, but they actually tend to perform worse than mixtures models, or at least mixtures models are easy to reason about how like the different experts can focus on different things. So we're pushing a lot of changes to Bittensor to facilitate that kind of, you might call it complexity or like sophistication when it comes to subnets. So subnets is one part of it. The ability to trim UIDs is another aspect of it, and eventually we will open up like different registration processes for the UIDs, and maybe even break out the UID sets altogether. So there's like you can have 3 sets of UIDs, or along with your subnets. Right now, the first implementation, which is just the easiest route, is just getting like multiple weights.
Okay, great. Thanks. And how many sub-subnets will be possible with this new mechanism?
So we're going to start with 8. And the reason for that is that we're just going to give a base 8 to every subnet on Bittensor, because we can sustain that. In the future, maybe we'll allow some of the like top subnets to have even more mechanisms, but we don't think that it really needs to go beyond that number. It's just sort of like an arbitrary number. 8 is reasonable, and it's not going to fill up the chain or overly bloat the chain. So this is just an intelligent limit to put on, a reasonable limit for what we can do.
Okay. And are sub-subnets expected to increase chain bloat as opposed to people starting new subnets, or is there actually a possibility of the opposite?
Well, there is a possibility of the opposite, because perhaps what we'll see is that um, there's less demand for slots, and people can actually just run multiple mechanisms, on their same subnet. So, like for instance, Templar, instead of having 3 subnets with Grail and Basilica and Templar, could actually integrate all 3 of those into one subnet. Some more complicated, and perhaps it's not the direction for them to go, but that would be possible. So it would reduce the UID pressure at the subnet level, the net UID pressure. But the truth is, yes, it will. It actually does cost more. Sending more weights, more space on the chain. The epoch is more expensive to run. It's more computationally expensive. So yeah, it will increase bloat, but I think that it's well justified for the way in which we're seeing the network and the community evolve.
Okay. And in your opinion, what would be the use cases where using sub-subnets is more advantageous, and then the use cases where operating entire new subnets is more advantageous?
I think that a lot of investors would be happy to know that their favorite subnet developer is is working with one token rather than multiple. I think that it's difficult to have multiple indices that you're worried about. Probably pretty complex and stressful for teams that have multiple subnets. So they can put all of that underneath a single token, a single like incentive mechanism, a single emission curve, a single root weight term, all of that can be, sort of like conceptually integrated rather than having like three indices that are balancing each other. So for instance, like maybe you have a an open source mechanism running on your subnet that is not easily monetized, but it's actually monetized by the closed source version of that subnet running alongside or in parallel to that mechanism. So I think that like economically it can also facilitate us going farther where we don't need to put like the less competitive or like directly revenue generating mechanisms on their own indices and actually just put them beside some other mechanisms. And I think this is what we see in large corporations that have similar sort of R&D departments, right? Like their base business model is what carries the price. Whereas they can have departments that focus on more experimental or open source aspects of their mechanism. So a good example might be like Ridges, right? Ridges is running a purely open source mechanism where like all of the code is visible from all of the miners. Um, and I know that they intend to have a closed source version that runs alongside that. Instead of having a secondary subnet, they can have both of those mechanisms easily running beside each other with their own emissions, their own weights, and so like the for profit aspect or like the non-open source aspect of that subnet can be what drags the cart forward, while the other one is helping as like a secondary role to spark innovation.
Okay, great. And we already have multiple groups within the Bittensor ecosystem that operate more than one subnet. With the advent of sub-subnets, do you see in future a reduction of teams owning multiple subnet slots?
Yes, we do. And, what we're trying to invent here is like a calculus for subnets, where we can have, multiple subnets within inside a subnet, but also the concept of like a merge, um, a destroy, a copy. One of the ones that's coming down right now is the actual destruction, as you guys know, for deregistration. So that's like a delete operation. But also we're going to we're working on a merge operation so that we can have subnets that have been dispersed just based on the technical limitations of the chain, like come back together. And so we're trying to figure out how to do that properly. So you could actually merge a subnet with yours that if you have another one. So yeah, I do think that we'll definitely see less teams running multiple subnets and maybe even those teams merging them back together in the future.
Okay, great, thanks. That was all the questions that I had for sub-subnets, but let's look in here and see if there's any questions from the community. Here's one from Swami. Open question, really, handling could be specific to each subnet versus sub-subnet versus master subnet, although with EMA pressure plus immunity as the filter and subnets controlling dividend routing, how does this get handled? Single token, whole thing goes goodbye?
I didn't understand the question. Can you say that again slower.
I don't know that I do either. Oh, that's a deregistration question. Uh,
Just read it back to me. Let's see if I can pull out a question from it.
sure. Handling could be specific to each sub-subnet versus master subnet, although with EMA pressure plus immunity as the filter and
Right.
subnets controlling dividend routing, how does this get handled?
Right. So in V1 subnets, like they're referring to the registration of actual miners on the subnet. So UID registration and deregistration. So currently they are fully integrated, which means there's no like secondary registration, and the your priority for deregistration on a subnet as a miner is the is like universal or global. It's not like specific to the subnet that you're mining. So this will be an interesting dynamic that we'll see play out, and I think that we're going to listen to what people want and integrate updates so that we can have like perhaps like different priority for deregistration of miners in the future. But V1 of subnets doesn't have that feature.
Okay, thanks. Here's one from Brian. Seems very unlikely that you would get the same incentive with one subnet versus three subnets. So one subnet with three sub-subnets compared to three different subnets. What are the thoughts here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that like because they're fully distinct, they have their own tokens, their own prices, their own registration parameters, their own deregistration parameters. Like they would not be exactly the same. It's like an annealment to that. It's not exactly the same thing. And like I said, the answer is the same um, to the previous question, which is that like this is V1. So V1 like deregistration is going to be global on the subnet, and therefore you can't mirror it perfectly. But there will be ways for people to build like sort of roots around that, and it's like very possible to think about how to implement that on the subnet as it is today.
Okay, great, thanks. Okay, I think let's move on to subnet deregistrations now. And before we go into the design of that, can we go back to the ideation phase for DTAO and explain why we launched without subnet deregistrations in the first place?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Um, so one of the things that we have noticed is that um, the long tail of subnets on Bittensor is showing that there's a lot. There's basically there's a lot of churn and dead projects, and what that's created is a secondary market for subnet slots, which was not our original intention. And so we feel like instead of allowing like the ever growing graveyard of subnets to just continue to fill up space and take have cost on Bittensor's blockchain. Sort of a garbage collection aspect to the subnets on Bittensor will free up space and allow us to grow like both larger because we can have maybe sub-subnets and actually give more resources to the subnets that are properly running on Bittensor or actively being developed, but also also like allow entrance into the top 128 subnets where most of the attention in the ecosystem is going. It seems like just experientially the attention there is sort of like this concept of real estate on Bittensor with the lower subnet UIDs. So we're just like adapting to the way in which the market has evolved and seeing that actually a fewer slots and having more attention on those fewer slots is going to be better for the network as a whole. um, if we scale in the net UID space, we go to way more subnets. We can't scale horizontally to have subnets in the same way. So this is really just a decision to go. Let's have more, well run active subnets and fewer like long tail subnets. I mean, another aspect to this as well is that we don't have a fully Pareto distribution on the subnet prices, and so if we increase the long tail, the sum of the prices of those subnets going into the infinity will substantially decrease the emission that could be driven to the top of the network, and we don't want to see that.
Okay, great. Thanks. So at this point, could you just give an overview of the plan for subnet deregistration and how that's going to work?
Yeah. So um, when a subnet is deregistered, we have a substantial number of outstanding tokens that are held by miners, owners, and investors. When a subnet registers, it's pulled out based on price. So it's the lowest subnet in terms of price, based on a moving average. So we're using the moving average of the price as a determiner, similar to the way in which a deregistration occurs on Bittensor subnets. Right, there's 256 UIDs, and what we do is we pull out the UID that has the lowest emission. We call that the priority. So the lowest priority subnet will be the one with the lowest price. And once that subnet is deregistered, it's deregistered on the registration of a new subnet into the ecosystem. So they take that slot. And when that occurs, we quote unquote liquidate or we convert. We do a conversion of the outstanding tokens into the TAO that's in the pool. So, if you, for example, I think like the lowest subnet on Bittensor has an outstanding market cap of about $500,000. There's $450,000, $600,000 worth of TAO. So those holders would basically just pull out their TAO and it would go back to their wallet. So it's a and in the place of that subnet would go the new one with a new pool, just like a new registration of a subnet.
Okay, great, thanks. This is a question that came up in the Church of Rao Open Dev call, and I wanted to bring it over here to discuss a bit more. What is the actual goal of subnet deregistration? Is this something that we're doing reactively to fix current problems, or is it forward-looking? How does this look when we have 1,000 subnets? The root of this question was it's a big decision since there's now institutional investors involved, and it really changes the investment from an eternal token to a non-eternal token.
Yes, I understand. We really discussed this internally for a very long time about like whether or not it's healthy for the ecosystem, and I think that it will be very healthy for the ecosystem because this like upward pressure, you could say like filtering of the quality of the subnets will reduce the like semantic and like conceptual load of the network so that people have less things to think about, and we can put more attention on whether or not somebody has a slot on Bittensor. So we I think we will be driving attention towards well-run subnets and increasing the performance and the credibility of the ones that are currently on the network. Part of this is also Bittensor is policed by its community. We keep this network in check as a community, it is protocol based, but it's also governed by individuals like the people that are on this call. And as we go into like thousands and thousands and thousands of subnets, it simply is not possible for us to like think about what's going on in Bittensor to see if there is proper like attacks in the network, and this will help us reduce that load and really like govern and improve the network as a community.
Hey, there's been some discussion that subnets which have previously been successful and therefore have plenty of tau liquidity in their pool, such as subnet 19, for example, could never be candidates for deregistration even when their projects have been abandoned. Could you talk about some of the inequalities between incumbent subnets like this and newer ones just starting out? This will be especially pertinent post-halving and after subsequent halvings.
Yeah, it's a very good question. There's no way to cut it other than yes, it will be more competitive for new subnets that are coming in that have lower liquidity, so that although I will note that like the lower liquidity also means that there is more volatility both directions. So price appreciation and depreciation are like equally, changed. Um, so like it's important to note. It's also like the argument is based on the idea that the average price of subnets will not increase as we improve the fitness of the pack, right? So I think that what we will see is that the average price, it does increase over time for new subnets, like as more quality enters the system, and so a subnet like 19 that has a ton of tau in the pool, if they do see like a massive downturn, it's still possible that they can be deregistered in the end. But ultimately, that will depend on factors that are not obvious to see right now.
Okay, thanks. Um, So there seems to be some debate in the community about subnet registration lock costs. Some saying that this should be burned at registration rather than locked and returned if a subnet gets deregistered. Can you explain why this specific design decision was made?
So we don't actually return all of the lock. We return the lock minus what the owner key has been paid out. So that is makes it neutral on behalf of the person registering the subnet. So if they register the subnet, and then they get their owner emission and then they're deregistered, that amount that they've been paid out will be subtracted from their lock. They don't get the full lock back. We did this initially just so that we can soften the blow. Ultimately, because the original subnets were told that um, uh, this lot was immutable. And that's what they locked into the subnet to attain the slot. So we don't think it's fair for us to not return that to registering subnets. In the future, we may fully burn the lock, but that will be long after it's like clear how the mechanism works, and that people are not making investment decisions under false information.
Yeah, I think a lot of the arguments that I've been seeing have been that if it's a burn, there's more skin in the game for the subnet owner registering a subnet, and that in the current mechanism, even if they're only receiving a subset of they basically receive their entire lock cost back
Yes.
through commissions and them getting it back. So
Mhm.
Could it be better for them to have more skin in the game?
Perhaps in the future, but current subnets on Bittensor that registered and locked these funds, we're told something different. And as we change the mechanism, we need to make sure that we're not hurting participants, um, based on like previously perceived risks and guidance, right? So it would be, I think it would be like totally unfair for us to register the subnet after the lock has been given to the network, and if we were to like just burn that and then take away the slot as well. So this is like, I think, a soft landing for this protocol change that will be helpful.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Um, okay, so previously, pre-DTAO, the registration previously the registration cost halved every 48 hours, and if no new subnet was registered. Are there any specifics you can share on how the new decay rate will work?
We're using the same decay rate, which is based on the half-life. So like how many subnets get registered. So we're going to start off really slow to see how this plays out, just so that people get a good amount of time to understand the new rules of the system, the new way that the system is evolving. So we're going to go really slow. So like the registration will be like, I think right now we're going to go with half a week. We'll give some more like specific numbers before the launch, but it's going to be slow so that we can test the mechanism, and there's not going to be like a fast churn in the network. So it's going to be slow at first, and then perhaps faster later on as we see how this plays out. So the number I'll throw out right now is half a week before registration. So the decay works that we double the price every time there's registration, and then it decays on a half life of so it'll be back to the same value after that that duration. So if we set that duration to, let's say, 3.5 days, let's say it was 1,000, it goes to 2,000, and then it's back to 1,000 after 3.5 days. And so that sort of like jaggedy registration rate is the same that it was in the past, and people are familiar with it.
Okay, great, thanks. And you mentioned 1,000. Is that going to be the registration cost when this feature goes live?
We're going to start high. Yeah, we're going to start we're actually considering to start to 2,000 and then decay. So it would take 3.5 days before it gets down to 1,000 again. We suspect it will stay high, but we recommend that people, don't ape and don't move fast, because these things are, dynamic, and they'll probably find the right equilibrium after a few weeks. But yeah, so we're going to start high and then anneal down, rather than starting low and then letting the original, like letting it be too low, so that like it's a whole bunch of registrations too quickly.
Okay, thanks. Um, and what is the plan for increasing the subnet limit? Will that be sitting at 128 for the foreseeable future?
Yes, it's going to stay at 128 for the foreseeable future. We will continue to monitor like how that plays out, and as the quality, like we did in the past, like as the quality of the subnets increases, we will give forwarding to the increase of the slot limit.
Okay. How long will the immunity period be for new subnets?
We're looking at 2 months.
2 months. I'd heard 4. Okay. Okay, interesting. That yeah, definitely shorter. And
Well, let me actually just check with Sam, who's in the call here. If it was 4, that I've actually just misspoke. It's 4 months. Okay, thanks, John. It's 4 months. You are correct. I should be asking you.
and are inactive subnets also susceptible to deregistrations?
Yes.
Okay, great. Um, okay, those are all the questions that I had. Let's look through the chat here. Okay, so the first one I see. Are you working on a solution to enforce the subnet owner to bring back the value revenue of the subnet output into the network? For example, if Ridges starts selling their product and starts making money, can they just start paying their miners and decide not to care about the alpha token and the stakers? Oh, this might be one that we save for later, not specifically on
It's
subnet.
it's a very good
Pretty wide.
question. So that there's this is something that's like very organically occurring. It's very interesting to see how teams are like building their own mechanisms for like bringing value back. A number of things have been tried, right? So Tau Hash was one of the first to build something that was like very revenue generating for validators. And And ultimately that actually fell apart because there wasn't a way to force the validators in a short enough period of time to quote unquote do the right thing. And so that's fallen apart, and so people are trying different mechanisms, like and I'm open to all sorts of creativity here. So there isn't a way to do this on chain, because value, like the purchasing of a computer, is not something that is represented on Bittensor because of the way that we abstract value. But it's very possible for subnet owners to build that directly into their subnets using EVM palette, and we think that this was one way that people will go, is to like drive value through an EVM palette with like a custom buyback. However, that might not be efficient, and so we're looking at teams that are building different versions of this, like from releasing equity in a company that represents the token, and ultimately the final arbiter here is the investors, the people that stake into these subnets and determine based on the way in which the technology is built to prove that, or to like guarantee the value creation goes back to the right people. Another team that's doing something interesting is it MetaHash, um, where they have this concept of the sheaf. I'm sure we could get Rhef on stage to talk about that. That's very interesting. But the answer to your question is that it's somewhat sporadic and somewhat creative right now, how people are solving that problem individually. There's no way to do it on chain.
Okay. So I'm moving into questions that that people had sent through in the last week. This one's on the Tau halving. So looking ahead at the very first halving of Tau this December, what is your thinking on how this will impact the network? Has OTF modeled out expected outcomes for subnet prices post halving? Would some of subnet prices still be expected to be around 1?
Yeah, this goes back to like the early iterations of DTAO, where um, in earlier versions we actually made tau emission like a pure subsidy of the price. Means that like the more emission you got, the higher we pushed your price. There's a really good reason why we didn't do that, and we actually opted for it. Adds liquidity at the price. This is what we see right now, right? So we inject tau and we inject alpha in, and it doesn't affect the price. It just sort of maintains it, or like helps reduce volatility. After the halving, there's less tau to go around, but the mechanism doesn't actually, because it doesn't affect the price. The halving won't affect the prices. It will, however, affect volatility in either direction for some that have less liquidity in their pools. But the mechanism is designed to stay the same. So we still have the sum of one bound, although it's less defended. And we still have the quality that it doesn't affect the subnet prices. So the way that we modeled it out is that we don't think it should affect the total subnet price. We don't think that ultimately it will really be noticed across the board on the subnets, except for perhaps increasing the volatility both in the positive direction and the negative direction for new subnets.
Okay. And another question we had about the Tau halving is there a plan to sync up the Tau and alpha halvings?
No,
Okay.
there's no plan there, and we don't intend to ever change the token economics and the inflation curves of the tokens or Tau.
Great. Okay, thanks. Um, Here's one on OTF decentralization. Are there any updates for OTF decentralization and proof of stake instead of proof of authority? Do you
Yes.
think OTF decentralization is worth it, and is it still too early?
No, I don't think it's too early. I think that this is the reason why we're working on it internally, from two angles, right? There's two prongs of decentralization that we are really beginning to see the need for. And are implementing. So the first one is actually chain level decentralization. And we're running a devnet that's proof of stake right now. And we're focusing right now on building another network which sort of mirrors transactions from mainnet. So we build a full clone that we're going to shit test it. We're going to try to break it as much as we can, and that's working with a proper proof of stake mechanism on Bittensor. So we sort of have the keys launch this, but we're being very conservative here and careful about how we implement this and how fast we implement this. We think that Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes time to get to the level of decentralization, and we're trying to be Taoist with our in our approach. Like, let's be careful. Let's see which way the wind is blowing in terms of need in decentralization at the chain level. So far, we don't think it's like the highest priority from a technical perspective, but it's certainly important from a mimetic and political and geopolitical reasons for Bittensor. And so that's why we have a team, building this out right now, and we could see this next year possibly. Then there's the other aspect, which is actual chain governance. So right now we have like the beginnings of like a very vocal and intelligent community of people, both in the Church of Rao, on novelty searches, people coming to the nucleus calls that are not part of OTF. So we're seeing this really like interesting and slow convergence to a proper democratic debate and control of the way in which Bittensor runs. And so we have actually like implementation details for how we want to draw this out. People have heard me talk about it in the past, how we want to have control from subnet owners. We want to have control from the Senate, and we also want to have to maintain the triumvirate that can push changes, but those changes can be blocked by individuals on both sides of the House. However, we have to be very careful here because in a lot of other decentralized governance approaches that you've seen in the rest of the crypto industry, what you need is concerned individuals. You need a community that understands what's being built and are actually participating. So we're building that primarily first. Church of Rao is a great example of that, where a lot of people come to those calls, like 75 people come to those calls and debate concepts, and we get a lot of pushback. And OTF effectively like implements a form of democracy where we hear voices, we hear pushback, and we stop changes. But we need to take that design and actually build it onto the chain so that the raw power is integrated cryptographically. So two pushes would be: one, chain decentralization. I say like next year is very possible. We already have a devnet, and we're working on doing a full mainnet clone. And as for actual chain democracy, we have implementations coming out for sort of like a triumvirate of different parties on Bittensor participating in decision making and the delay of pushes, while really thinking hard about how we can move fast while still decentralizing the control from the triumvirate, being able to be selected by individuals. Currently, like, I'm not even on. I don't have any keys to upgrade the chain. I'm simply like somebody that has a lot of soft power when it comes to OTF. But the raw power here comes from the key holders of the triumvirate that make the actual updates. So we want to take that. We're going to start with allowing those keys to be cycled. Next will be allowing for delays from both the subnet owners and the Senate, where if there's a majority of vetoes from either of those houses, we can actually stop something from going through. But we still can push things from the triumvirs. We can propose and do upgrades to the chain in a fairly fast manner without if there's social consensus. That's our goal for going forward in the next like 6 to 8 months.
Okay, moving on to a question about Yuma versions. So what was the initial reason and motivation for implementing Yuma-2 consensus?
It's a good question. So Yuma-1, Yuma-1 was able to. You can think of Yuma-1 as just a pure weight matrix with some consensus. So the miners that were at the consensus point in the attractor state of the validators would get paid like exponentially more. So that was Yuma-1. But we needed a way to actually stop bad validators from diverging. So this way, Yuma-2 was the integration of bonds, which is what determines dividends. So dividends, if you diverge from the consensus point as a validator, you get charged. And so this creates this like a harder form of consensus. Now, Yuma-3 is an even harder form of consensus that works better with commit reveal, which allows us to fight weight copying. what we've been working on in the background here is sort of like the abstraction of Yuma consensus, like Yuma-T, and we're calling it Yuma-T internally, but you can think of it as like Yuma-4, where where subnet owners can understand, we can like fully understand like the payoff, like the interplay between like forced consensus and like looser consensus with some subnets, for instance, like a TAO hash. There's not as much need for consensus because the commodity is like clearly valuable to the to the validators. So we're building sort of abstracted version of Yuma consensus that allows for that malleability. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so interesting that you mentioned Yuma 4. The follow-ups to this question were, is Yuma 3 in its current state better in more cases than Yuma 2? Assuming it is, why do you think Yuma 3 is not more widely adopted across the network? And what are the major roadblocks and challenges for doing so? And I guess that extends to Yuma 4 as well. Do you think there's going to be a similar slow integration from subnet owners of Yuma 4? And why would that be?
Yeah, I mean, there are just some teams that are happy with how it's working, and there are some teams that are more focused on evading weight copying. Yuma 3 is really a tool for fighting that in a more direct way, and there are some subnets that really want that. And so our perspective is that we want to build tools for people to build the mechanisms that they want. Um, some teams simply just are not at the stage where something like weight copying is the most important thing in the network, and they just haven't turned it on. There's also and there are missionaries out there like Rhef that are really that's true. But some subnets just simply haven't turned it on because it's not their highest priority.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so moving on to a question about scalability. What is the limit of scalability for Bittensor? It seems like having all the subnets connect to the root chain provides a fundamental limit for how many subnets it's possible to handle. The chain will only get more and more bloated over time. Do you see an upper limit here?
I think this like harkens back to the previous question um, about deregistration and where we want to go. Do we want to have you know tens of thousands of subnets with like not that many, not really a strong team behind them, or is it better to have fewer subnets that are very well managed? And like my perspective is that just looking at the state of the network right now, I think that pushing towards fewer teams with more eyeballs and like stronger communities is what we need right now. There is obviously an upper limit to what Bittensor can achieve. The chain has limits, right? That there is like it's costly to run human consensus. Like blockchains have all of the state on the chain forevermore, and that's part of the transparency of blockchain. So there are limits, and I personally think that what we discovered is that like that scaling in that direction is not the highest priority for what's going to make Bittensor succeed. Some people might disagree with me on that though.
Okay. Miner emissions. For ages, miners have been asking for subnet owner burn emissions proportional to miners' burn emissions. Are there plans for this to happen?
Yeah, it's a very contentious topic, and like I'll talk a little bit at length about like why it is the way it is. Um, so right now we have this issue where a lot of teams are opting for a burn, and there's uproar from the miner community. The truth is that if the validators run the code that runs the burn, they could run anything. And they could run, for instance, that all the funds go to a secondary key that's owned by the owner. And we built the burn key in so that we could make things more transparent on Bittensor, because you might actually be having a situation where a subnet doesn't have any burn. It doesn't look like it's burning anything, but in reality, it is burning, and all the keys are the same. Um, like they're all owned by the owner. right? So, and then they're not being burned; they're actually just giving all of the funds to the owner. So there's simply no way on the chain for us to know whether or not they're actually burning or they're not. So we could implement something like, okay, if you burn, we'll burn the owner emissions. And the truth is that the bad guys will just simply circumvent that, so to speak, and they'll just put something in where they send all the funds to a different key, and then it doesn't look like it's a burn. So we'd really just be punishing the teams that are trying to be more transparent about what they're doing. Ultimately, the people that need to like what we need to do as a community is like reward the teams that are being productive for being productive, and that comes from believing what their mission is. But if they're just spending resources arbitrarily, then perhaps it's just bad for Bittensor. So it's really like a battle in that dimension. Like, can we support the teams that are using their missions effectively versus teams that are not? And like that's up to the community here that is staking from subnets.
Okay, another one about emissions. Are incentives always going to remain 18, 41, 41?
No, actually, we were just talking today about allowing for people to change the validator proportion. This is doable. It will muddy and complexify things, and so this is why we've been reluctant to do this. We feel like right now we're trying to build like a consistent investment portfolio.
I think you muted there, Jake.
Sorry. Yeah. So right now we're trying to like make the investment direction and Bittensor like less complex. The last 6 months has been really about us understanding the core mechanism of DTAO. So I think now it's probably time for us to allow this change, but it will change the incentive design and like the structure of the investment as you see that emission changes with validator proportion changing.
Okay, what about subnets that self-incentivize? Why are there so many subnets that are self-incentivizing or don't offer good support to miners? Why is there no check for that? Does that mean TAO is wasted in such cases and no one can do anything about it?
Self-incentivizing, so like people are just purchasing the subnet. Yeah, so like the root prop, if you look at the way that it's working, right? So in order for you to maintain the price indefinitely, you actually have to counter that root prop. So this is a very costly strategy. The only way for us to counter it as a community is actually to reward the teams and the projects that are properly building something. If there's no distinction between the people that are just burning money for nothing and investors, picking subnets that are successful, then yes, there is no way for us to know on the chain level. But the self incentivization is a costly strategy, and in an incentivized network, you have to make things just disincentivized, and I think that it is directly disincentivized, and the teams that are doing that ultimately are they're going to cost themselves.
Okay. What about MEV? How do MEV and registration bots control transactions priority in block in Bittensor?
So Mev attackers, what they try to do is find a transaction or a stake or an unstake operation and sandwich the attack they buy before and sell after. Um, we implemented some changes just the other week where we directly hit the ability for people to do this and substantially reduce the amount of map that's on the chain. We also have additional mechanisms that are going to randomize the operations so that it'll be even harder. And like it's a well-known problem in decentralized networks around meth. So, but we think we can actually attack this better than any other chain on, in this ecosystem. So, yeah, like if the question is MEV, like what is it? The answer is it's sandwiching transactions. But like we've actually seen a substantial reduction in it since we pushed the last change, and we're going to have more changes like that really squash it out in the next little while.
Right. Okay. So that was all the questions that I noted that the community had sent through. I've had difficulty monitoring the chat here, but if anyone has any other questions that they really want answered right now, this is the time. Send them through in the chat, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Do we think the tax can pose a centralization risk or economic shock?
Yeah, a lot of talk about this. Um, so just want to speak to a little bit about like how we've run Bittensor in the past and how I think we will continue to run it. Is that we're a very adaptive ecosystem. I think this sort of mirrors that we're merging crypto and AI because like AI is fundamentally all about technological adaptation. We move fast, we break things, we see how things play out. We've been gifted a lot of trust from our community to do the right thing, and so right now there is centralization of stake around purely child keying validators. We don't intend to remove child keying because I think it provides a value add to the ecosystem. This will probably change the way or shift the stake in Bittensor, but I don't think that it will change centralization. I actually think that it will reduce it. But back to my previous point, like if we see it not working, like we can remove this mechanism and see how things change, and we're to come up with different solutions. But I actually think it's going to be highly positive for pushing value towards more productive aspects of the ecosystem. And I don't think it's going to necessarily centralize stake around any individual validators. It should just promote validators that are properly running infrastructure across the subnets, which add a lot of value. Like they're helping teams run their subnets as opposed to purely running an abstracted yield farming mechanism.
Okay, what else do we have here?
You know,
Um,
there was a question I don't think I asked and I answered very well, which actually from is it Yuma-2 to Yuma-3. Like we have Ref here. Maybe he wants to come up and answer that question in more detail.
we
Here
got
we go, Ref. Ref, like why don't you ask that question again but we'll have Ref answer it.
okay.
Does it work? Does my mic work?
What was, yep, you're on. We can hear
Okay.
you. Okay, so what was the initial reasoning and motivation for implementing Yuma 2 consensus? What about Yuma 3? Is Yuma 3 in its current state better in more cases than Yuma 2? Assuming it is, why do you think Yuma 3 is not more widely adopted across the network? And what are the major roadblocks for doing so?
Okay. This question has like 4 parts. Um, I will start from the easiest. Yuma 3, for all we know, and it's been out for a while, so if there was a problem with it, we would know already. Yuma 3 is better than Yuma 2 in all dimensions. There's no advantage of using Yuma 2 over Yuma 3, with one exception. If you are a subnet owner who is a major holder and you operate a large validator and you want to disproportionately punish the small validators, you could use Yuma 2 for that. This is the only way in which I know how you could use Yuma 2 to your benefit. It has not been deployed by many people. One of the reasons is the paper is not out yet. The R&D department is still working on it to codify it into math. And once that is released, some teams said that they will look on it when the paper's out. What I say is Yuma 3 is a really good implementation of Yuma 2 algorithm. It's actually better than Yuma 2 algorithm. The Yuma 2 implementation had some implementation problems. It was not working as well as it was intended to work, and actually we understood the spirit behind Yuma 2, and we understood how it actually, and we made it work how it was intended to work. And because the changes were so massive, we had to increase the major version number. Now, Yuma 1 is a very like rudimentary algorithm which works in many cases, but it does not incentivize validators to change their weights. So let's imagine we have a very simple subnet. There is one miner winning who has the best neural network that does something. Then a new miner pushes in a new change. When one of the validators will see the new leader, he will detect it. He will start voting, he start setting weights to the new leader. But if not everybody switches to the new leader at the same time, then it might be that the first one who switched his weights is going to be penalized by Yuma, because Yuma is going to see that he is the only one that strayed away from the consensus. So, and that's being penalized. Eventually, everybody will switch to the new miner, but sooner or later, that validator who was always switching first because he had the best GPU, he was verifying the models first, he will realize he's paying more money for the hardware, he's performing a higher quality service, he's being paid the least. So eventually someone figured out, okay, we can't do it like that, because then the first validator that realizes this, he will start delaying his decisions, and he's going to say, okay, I'm never going to be first to change. And then the second guy will do it, the third guy will do it, and eventually all validators will start delaying their decisions to switch weights, and eventually the subnet will just stop, right? The new miner will appear, and nobody will want to be the first to take the financial penalty for setting the weights first. And so that's when the idea of Yuma-T was born, where you are being paid for having bonds, and you get the bonds because you weight someone. So theoretically, you should be getting the bonds early on for that new leader, and then yes, temporarily you will be paid less because you strayed away from consensus, but when everybody switches, then after the switch, you will be paid handsomely, and the premium that you're going to get after everybody switches is going to be significantly higher than the amount that you sacrificed between the time when you switched and everybody else switched. And that is how it was supposed to work. But due to some implementation issues, that's not how it ended up working. And we tried to fix it, but on the way, we found several other exploits, and many people from the community contributed to coming up with solutions, and eventually we settled up on solution that solved all the problems that we have seen, and has not provided degradation in any of the scenarios. That's what we implemented. And while doing that, we also recognized that Liquid Alpha 1 has a little bit of a deficiency in a way in which it decides who to assign alpha low and who to assign alpha high. And we have reworked that as well rather substantially. So now you can, as a subnet owner, if you use Yuma-3, you can actually decide how many bonds you give to the validators who are late. So it's a specific penalty for being late, and that severely impacts weight copiers. Okay, what was the part of the question that I missed?
I think you answered it well.
Okay.
Kakashi says, how can Rhef fight alone against most part of Bittensor still weight copying? Do you feel like you're fighting alone, Rhef?
No, that was one of the most horrifying things when I've noticed that Yuma-T is not working properly, and I thought I have to leave the ecosystem because there was no hope. But eventually, like, I brought up my concerns to OTF, and I received so much support that I didn't know that someone can receive that much support, but I got all of it, and
Well, that's very kind.
we got it done together. That wouldn't happen if I was the only one working on it. So I was not only just assured that yes, we can do it, you also helped me quite a bit.
And now
as did the community.
Yes.
People from the community that I had no idea they were going to help, they stepped up and done it together with us. So that was quite an experience.
Yeah, and there's a good point to be made about how this Yuma-3 really should become default very soon. So we'll talk about that
I
another
agree.
time. But yes, I think it should become default very soon. But I brought Fish on stage because I believe there's differing opinions on whether or not it should be enforced if he wants to speak. But in the meantime, since he's muted, we'll continue with more questions from the chat.
The two big problems I see with Yuma-3 are that it makes validating like a game. So in the same way that miners exploit subnets all the time, I think it actually opens up a lot more exploits for validations. One of the major ones I notice is that you get rewarded for finding weights early. So basically any subnet which has an EMA built into the validation mechanism, you could just remove that and get higher validation weights, even if the subnet owner doesn't want you to do this.
Okay, so let me correct myself, because last time when I was on stage, I didn't say it precisely enough. Yuma-3 has a parameter called bond penalty, and it actually works. Bond penalty is set to 1 for all subnets by default, and it should stay there unless someone wants to turn it down. As far as I know, only 1 or 2 subnets have turned it down. The behavior that you're talking about is specific to bonds penalty being less than 1. If you don't want the behavior that you're talking about, just don't touch the bond penalty parameter. It is this parameter that is, by the way, it was also implemented in Yuma-T, it just didn't work correctly. And the pull request is from December 2023, so before I joined the ecosystem. That's not my invention. And bond penalty, if you turn it less than 1, then you are able to acquire bonds for weights that were clipped. And this is what allows you to do the thing that you just said.
Yeah,
so let's not let this erode into a debate. Both of you guys have said your points. I think that's really the highlight here. The headline. Do we have more questions, Agrippa, from the chat?
Yeah, so I've got one from Mache. The initial decision was to remove both convergences that would have kept the sum of alpha prices at 1, but then the upside convergence was reintroduced. Why has OTF decided to make the alpha downscaling causing upwards pressure on the prices and kept it with the revision to the subsidy mechanism? In testnet, there was TAO downscaling, which also kept the injection always neutral. Why has that changed with the push to mainnet?
You have to read that again from the start. So I understood the question when it ended, but if you can give me the full context again.
The initial decision was to remove both convergences that would have kept the sum of alpha prices at 1, but then the upside convergence only was reintroduced. Why has OTF decided to make alpha downscaling causing upwards pressure on the prices and kept it with the revision to the subsidy mechanism? In testnet, there was TAO downscaling, which also kept the injection always neutral. Why has that changed with the push to mainnet?
I think we need to get Mache on the up here to explain that. I had this problem with him earlier on another call. I was like, how do I not understand what the question is? This is really a deep question, Mache. Can you give us some more color here?
Yeah. Sorry. So essentially, on the testnet before the recent design of TAO launched, so like January, around about that time, there was alpha downscaling to limit how much.
Sorry, alpha downscaling. You're talking about during the injection when we scale alpha.
Yes, exactly. That's what I wanted to go to. So alpha downscaling essentially is so that you don't want that the alpha injection is higher than initially the alpha block commission, and because of that, when you limit that now, when you cap it, What happens is that now more tau per alpha is emitted. So that would
Yes.
essentially create buy pressure.
Yeah, when we drop
Initially,
below one.
Yes. Initially in the testnet design, there was also tau downscaling, which essentially
Yes.
when
Yes.
alpha was downscaled, it was
And
the
we took
tau.
we took that out
Yeah.
before we took that out before we launched DTAO. That's true. Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
what
so-
was the reason for that actually? Like because
Yeah.
I know
So-
it happened, but not why.
Well, so our perspective was that without the scaling of with the tau injection scaling, basically tau is fully agnostic to prices. And our perspective was that below a price of 1, that we felt that the chain should be there sort of as a buyer of last resort, so that we could continue to incentivize the network at the current rate, which is 1 tau per block, right? So across the prices, the total, it's 1.7 or whatever right now, but we wanted there to be a consistent proportion of incentive. So we decided to remove that to scale alpha instead of tau. So that's what actually like helps maintain the prices above 1. So it's like tau's incentive of the subnets. It's our gift to the subnets, if you think about it. And this I think is important for like staker confidence in the network, right? So we are actually like cushioning the subnets and giving them incentive and not just letting things go to zero. I mean, I think that most people in this crowd would agree that it's like a fair trade for the network. And also, like you could argue that maybe the prices all should go to 0, and while they're like overvalued, but I think that would be like anti-innovation on the chain. So we went with this design. It was kind of last minute, but I think it was the right decision.
Yeah.
Like as we've seen the last little while, like it's helped stabilize the prices and build like a floor that helps with making this network really run and people have investor confidence.
Yes, thank you. I could also ask one more follow-up question, probably for the chat, if you would like to answer it. So since the DTAO update, the Senate has been kind of broken because it can't create proposals on itself anymore, as it's only pseudo only since the DTAO upgrade, and the validators, or like the eligibility to be a Senate member, is not accounting for alpha stakes. It only accounts for the root stake, so tau stake. So would that change? Would DTAO be part of governance? And when would such a new governance structure come, if at all?
Right. So you're referring to the Senate?
Yeah.
My understanding is that it's not that way. I unless I'm totally misinformed. It's actually the total stake weight that counts, not just tau.
At least when I checked, it was that. It could be that I'm outdated on it, but anybody can correct me.
When you go to tau stats, you look at the weight. It's actually like a combination of both alpha and tau. That was my understanding. But if you're telling me that's incorrect, that seems like an error. It should be both. And as Rapido says, there hasn't been a Senate vote yet. But it sounds like there is a call for that. Like we should reflex that muscle. In terms of voting. Is that desirous?
I think so. I think a lot of people would like to have more governance, like on-chain happening instead of decisions kind of going through without any votes happening.
Okay. Heard. That's exciting. I really think it's a fantastic way for us to Yeah, and so this is what I was answering in previous messages. Like, yes, we're going to make it so that you can propose things to subnet owners and you can veto things, but we still have actually the mechanism on chain to do a full vote, and we should do that. We have a question. Is GTG, is that a question for the panel here, or no? It's just for Joseph Jacks. Agrippa, do you have any more questions that you've mined from the chat here? Kakashi says trusted humanity gets exploited. Yeah, it's really about having a balance in terms of the governance of the chain. Like if you look at the pure democracy versus a republic, where you have separations of powers and distribution of power, that's what we're really trying to bring out. Right? These things take time, and they really should take time, because if you can go too fast, and it looks like in the industry people always go too fast. So let's be intelligent about it. JB Ring says, how would a merger work? This is a good question. Basically, you merge the pools and you merge the token outstanding in a way that's fair, based on the prices. There's actually like a lot of complexity about how you can do that in a fair way so people can't manipulate the prices. That's for a different call, but I just wanted to throw that out as something that we're interested in, both forking subnets and merging subnets, so that'd be possible to go away and vote with your feet. If you're like, hey, this subnet is not good, we're going to try to fork it, create another subnet that has the same token ownership, but it can be run with different team. Like for instance, you're like, oh, Const is really not running his subnet properly, let's fork Affine. We're making that possible. Okay, someone has asked, Boromir has said, can you please expand your previous answer from this point of view? What exactly is the question here? This is exactly my hesitation with staking. What's the context here? I hope my question gets passed. Are you working on a solution to enforce the subnet owner to bring back the value? Yes. Okay. Yeah. So that was the original question. And the follow-up was, this is exactly my hesitation with staking. Thank you for expressing it this way. The incentive mechanism works for solving the AI challenges within the subnet, but there isn't an incentive mechanism for subnet owners to increase alpha value at the proportion of their real world market success. This is what JJ and Sam were touching on. The subnets will figure it out, but there's nothing that solidifies this on chain in a way that in an on-chain way that revenue, profits, losses, received outside flows back to the alpha token of economics. So one way to do it is to think of something like a treasury company, where if you look at like what MetaHash is doing, is it MetaHash or Infinite Hash? Sorry, Infinite Hash, that's what I meant before. They put the Bitcoin into a pool, or at least they used to. But I actually like hear from Fish on the stage here, because you're really directly interfacing with this problem. So like, what's your thoughts, Fish, on how you're going to achieve that with Liam, if he's still here?
I wasn't paying attention. How I can achieve what?
How you can tie the commodity in 51 to the alpha value, and how you intend to do that.
So there's two ways. One would be to just buy back with all external revenue back into the subnet token, which would directly positively affect the holders. And then the second way would just be do distributions similar to dividend distributions in stocks. I put a tweet about this. I'm still thinking about the best way to positively benefit the holders. I think you have a variety of options, and subnet owners can just pick whatever works best for them.
Yeah, because it's one size fits all. It's not really that kind of situation. Have you seen any interesting dynamics or like designs that come from the EVM palette, Fish?
No, I think in most cases using that now is mainly overcomplicating things, like using smart contracts to try to automate a lot of things when it doesn't really need to be automated right now, as long as you trust the subnet owner. But for now, I think people just need to focus on getting external revenue and then putting it back into their token. Not only does it help your token, but it just helps TAO for everybody.
There was a conversation happening with Sam from Subnet 10. What was his ideas?
Sam's been messaging me about automating buybacks from fiat to your subnet token, essentially. This is what I was talking about. I don't think it's really necessary now when I can just do a command and manually do it at any time. Same with the burn. As long as people trust me that I will burn or use those funds for whatever's best for my subnet. I mean, at this point, I think I'm sufficiently aligned. I have like 30% of the supply, and most subnet owners probably feel the same way, that it's a trust thing. If subnet owners are in a position where they don't have community trust, they should be able to automate these things with the smart contracts, which might be useful for new teams coming to the ecosystem that aren't as well known. But apparently, so we have some of our revenue coming through Stripe on fiat, and Sam just told me this today that Stripe offers an option to do payouts in stablecoins rather than direct transfers to your bank in beta. So as long as you do that, then there's an option to do crypto to alpha automated, and not have to worry about fiat at all, which would be super interesting.
Does this like is this the most efficient way to do this because it depends on the current price of the pool, etc.?
I mean, you can turn it into like a DCA script. Rhef's was doing some interesting things with the chef, where it was like unexpected buys, right? So you can't front run the buyback wallet with your own revenue or something like that. But then again, it just depends on the subnet, however they want to do it.
Rhef, do you want to speak to that design since you're on stage?
Yes. So subnet 89 makes miners mine Bitcoin, and then this Bitcoin is automatically exchanged to USDT, I guess, and then to
Wait,
TAO,
Rhef, I've
and
always
then
wondered that. How do you automate that? How do you automate Bitcoin to
it's
USDT?
it's a script running from the subnet owner's
What pool does
terminal
it
or
use
something.
to swap?
Mexi, and he uses a DCA script, which and like some on Mexi you need to like buy 1,000 of their tokens or something to reduce the fees or something. So generally the fees are practically zero on the entire process, and then he stakes it into the subnet into a wallet that will never unstake. So it's effectively as it would be burned.
So you've
And
also
this
automated withdrawals from Mexi into, so
yes,
you automated like through a Mexi API, I assume,
yes, Mexi
swapping
has an
from
API, and
Bitcoin to USDT, then you swap from USDT to TAO on Mexi, then you withdraw from TAO on chain, then you buy from TAO to Alpha on chain. There's like 6 steps. All of them are incredibly hard to automate.
no, they're not. I wrote a script like a year ago to automate all of that.
Because doesn't the withdrawal on Mexi also require 2-factor authentication? How do you do that?
So there is a whitelist thing where you can do it. Trust me, you can do it.
Cool.
But like even if it wouldn't be purely automated, but someone would be pushing a button every 24 hours, doesn't really matter.
Right. Yeah, this was my point.
So yeah, the chef should be fully automated. Should be smart contracts running on Ethereum or whatever. It's not currently, and I agree with you. This is not the most important part right now. Bringing revenue to the subnet and making it so that we buy more TAO than the miners can unstake is more important than providing full trustless automation.
Right. I think those are two very interesting directions. But in the spirit of like keeping the conversation brief and also on topic, are there any more questions, Agrippa, that we should answer regarding the updates coming down the pipe here?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat that is pertinent.
Okay. Well, then without further ado, why don't we end the call here? Yeah, thanks Agrippa for hosting with us. Hopefully we answered most of your questions and people got a better understanding of deregistrations and subnets and